Session 5 of the Islamabad Security Dialogue. The dialogue is being live streamed and the audience in the hall is of the think tank officials and the organizers and the speakers. The Session 5 of Islamabad Security Dialogue is on the evolving world order in Pakistan. The session convener is Brigadier Rashid Wali Janjua. Brigadier Rashid Wali is Acting President, Islamabad Policy Research Institute. Brigadier Rashid is a graduate of Military College Engineering, Command and Staff College Quetta, National Defence University Islamabad, and Royal Military College Kingston, Canada. At present, he is a PhD scholar at National University of Science and Technology, NUST. Brigadier Rashid Wali has a diversified civil engineering project management experience and has served in various command assignments, including Pakistan Military Academy and Command and Staff College Quetta. He has held the command assignments at Infantry Brigade, Headquarter Corps Engineers, Military Training Directorate, and Director Works and Chief Engineer, Pakistan Navy. Brigadier Rashid Wali has also served as Director Planning and Development of Fauji Group of Companies. I now request Brigadier Rashid Wali to start with the session proceedings. Over to you, sir.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Special Assistant to Prime Minister on National Security and Strategic Planning, Mr. Moeed Yusuf, distinguished panelists and participants, Assalamu alaikum. It is my proud privilege to welcome all you on this plenary session of Islamabad Security Dialogue. On behalf of Islamabad Policy Research Institute, we all extend a very warm welcome to all members of academia and media who were there and throughout the session who made this entire dialogue a great success. Now, this institute was founded in 1999. It was a brainchild of Mr. Mushahid Hussain, who was the information minister there, and his idea was for the fructification of thought process in a very challenging environment post 1999. This institute took a different orientation, and it was placed under Chief Executive Secretariat. Now, the institute, after its recent affiliation with National Security Division, has undergone a series of reforms aimed at tailoring its research products to the needs of policy-making hubs and enhancing the global outreach as a modern think tank. With Dr. Moeed Yusuf as our ex-officio patron, we have greater penetration and greater traction with the policy-making hubs in the respective ministries. The research areas being focused upon are the strategic studies, public policy and governance, international relations, and lawfare and economy. The topic chosen for the plenary session is the evolving world order in Pakistan. Nothing exemplifies the current global environment better than the Chinese saying that may you live in interesting times. We all therefore are living in an era where the new global alliances are being forged with the prospects of peace and war both palpably evident. New security and economic alliances like Indo-Pacific, Quad, and RCEP portend a Hobbesian world, whereas each protagonist in the conflict equation hankers for Kantian beneficence. Now, an inclusive and stable world order is the desire of countries like Pakistan, which have to anchor their national narratives and interests in a maelstrom of instability and the shifting global alliances. How West Pakistan can do so is the subject of our discourse today, which our worthy panelists are best suited to enlighten us about. On IPRI's panel today, we have three distinguished panelists, along with the moderator, Dr. Huma Bukai, a well-known scholar with a teaching and research experience spanning over 25 years. She has worked with national and international media since 1999 as an international relations and political analysis expert. Our first panelist, Mr. Ali Jahangir Siddiqui, is a former Special Assistant to Prime Minister and Minister of State and Ambassador of Pakistan to the United States. He also founded and chaired the board of JS Bank and JS Private Equity Management. He will speak on emerging world order. Our second panelist, Mr. Mushahid Hussain Syed, is a former information minister and a seasoned parliamentarian who is currently heading Senate's Defense Committee. He has been an eminent journalist and has authored 3 books. He is also credited with founding IPRI in 1999, which is a testament to his prescience about the need and efficacy of think tanks in Pakistan. He will be speaking on key opportunities and challenges for Pakistan. Our third speaker, Ms. Hana Rabbani Khair, is a former foreign minister. She has also been a Minister of State for Finance and Economic Affairs and was the first woman minister to present national budget. She will be speaking on key challenges to look out for Pakistan in future. I now request the distinguished panelist and the moderator to please step onto the podium and begin the proceedings.
Assalamu alaikum ji, good evening. And when I saw the timings of this session and the way the day progressed, I thought I would only be speaking to the chairs and people online. So I'm extremely grateful to all of you, even in the upper arena, for staying back. And I hope the session is interesting enough for you for your worthy time. I've been asked to talk about the evolving world order and the role of Pakistan. But a term that has overtaken the world order is now the world disorder, and the whole debate about whether the global order is in a state of transition. And if it is in a state of transition, what is the role for countries like Pakistan? The 2-day deliberations have been extremely intense. We've had participants from all over the world practically. We've heard some very interesting policy statements. And I was in a discussion with 2 very distinguished women this afternoon, and while we were talking about all that had happened, the thought that came to us was that for 2 days, all we've talked about is what ought to be done. And then I thought that it's not what ought to be done, we should be talking about what can be done. Pakistan's foreign policy was known for its constraints and compulsions, and did well despite of that. Have we moved on to a situation where we have options and choices? And what are those options and choices? And are they real? Do we really have them? And of course, in everything that we heard, there was this underlying theme of the rivalry between China and the United States. And this China-United States rivalry has what I say, the 4 C's, whether it's competition, it's cooperation, or it's confrontation. And then we come to the 4th more dangerous C, which is containment. So let's see how things shape up. There's also the whole concept of the new Cold War. And they say that the new Cold War will be fought on the sea lanes, and will be very different from the one that we've lived through, because there are no ideological differences. And that perhaps brings me to this very interesting concept that we've been hearing for 2 days of a paradigm shift from a geopolitical state to a geoeconomic state for Pakistan, or for the world for that matter, because BRI is also about geoeconomics. And I wonder if the world that we live in is essentially a crisscross of geoeconomics and geopolitics. The lines have blurred. There cannot be this compartmentalization that we talk about. And the last thing that perhaps I want to say here, and I have a very distinguished panel, and I'm sure they'll have some very interesting things to say, is 21st century regionalism. Is the regionalism of the 19th and 20th century a thing of the past? It's not about intra-regional paradigms. It's about inter-regional collaborations. And is that what 21st regionalism is all about? And here is where, ladies and gentlemen, I see a very, very distinguished role for Pakistan. Pakistan has been called a pivot state several times. In fact, Qaeda-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah was perhaps the first one who many years ago had the vision to say that. But a new term that is being coined for Pakistan today is Pakistan a zipper state? And this term has interestingly come out from the deliberations that are happening in Moscow about Pakistan. And those are the new nexuses and the new alliances the foreign minister also referred to. Yes, we are probably in a strategic convergence with Beijing, and we have an important relationship with the United States. But what is happening between Beijing and Moscow, and how will that perhaps impact the role of Pakistan in the evolving transition order or disorder that we're talking about? So with all of that, I'm now going to request Madam Hina Rabbani Khar to share her views with us, and thank you so much for joining us online, Madam. Over to you.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be on this, what is clearly turning out to be a prestigious dialogue in terms of ideas that have already come through. Okay, so I think obviously to close with a session which is on evolving world order in Pakistan, and specifically I've been asked to talk about the key challenges that face Pakistan in the evolving world order. I think it is clear, first of all, that the world around us is not only changing, but it has already changed. It is also clear that the world order that was there post World War II has neither evolved nor changed with the changing world dynamics and the changing world realities. And therefore, a lot of us are looking at it as disorder and as a bit chaotic. But do not forget, every time emergence of a new, superpower-ish state and has happened in the past also, we've had similar challenges on recreating the new realities or recreating a world order according to the new realities. Now, I thought before going into what are the key challenges for Pakistan, it might be useful to really, because as a foreign minister, as a former foreign minister of Pakistan, I used to always struggle with the question as to what is or what are the objectives of foreign policy of any country. Is it some grand ideals, some idealism, or is it even some sort of a, propagating some ideas or ideology, or is it to serve the country? And when we say serve the country, do we mean the rivers and the 7 highest mountains of the world, or do we mean the people? So to me, immense clarity is required in what ought to be, first of all, the objective of a foreign policy of any country, including that of Pakistan. And the objective has to be to serve. So what you do outside must benefit people inside. If your foreign policy is not able to achieve it, then you're not doing what you ought to be doing. Now, I was, this is obviously, to open with like 3 to 5 minutes. I thought I'd just break it down in 5 or 6 key challenges that Pakistan faces in this evolving world order. Now, challenge number 1, to me, is perhaps the most important, which is that Pakistan has to understand that how it performs within its geographical boundaries will determine the course or the weight that it has outside of its geographical boundaries. So if we are a country which is considered to be an economic asset and a strategic asset to others, then our ability to engineer a change or have a role, a positive one only, will obviously be far, far, far more. So what we do within the boundaries will have an impact, and we have to know already. We already do know that today, in today's world, if you have economic might, if you are of economic relevance, your political other relevance comes with it. If you're economically relevant, and if you're a country which is going to be, on somebody support your ideas ought to be. So the key challenge number 1 is that economically, first of all, have to ourselves. The key challenge number 2 is to first of all understand and accept the changing regional and global dynamics. There have been tectonic shifts in the region in terms of alignments. Now, we cannot be married to ideals and ideas of pre-1990s as to where those alignments were. The alignments have changed. We have to accept the fact that the alignments have changed, that the world has changed, that the region has changed, and therefore engineer a foreign policy according to those changing realities. Now, we cannot wish them away. A lot of people, I feel, want to wish those changes away and feel that by talking or speaking or trying to articulate what we want of the world, we can get it. I think that's a useless exercise. It's not what we want of the world, it is also what the world may want to give to us. And that obviously, as I said before, is quite a bit impinging upon how we govern ourselves within. Key challenge number 2 is to be able to understand that we cannot compromise or undermine Pakistan's natural strategic alignment with China, because we do know that much of the changing world order also has to do with the containment of China policy. As I said before, as China is emerging as an economic and perhaps certainly a political power, there is less of the world, especially the US and the EU, in terms of engagement with China and more on containment. And within that, Pakistan obviously falls on the wrong side of the rest of the world. So it's extremely important that we do not compromise what is a natural strategic alignment with China because of what is happening in the rest of the world. However, we have to also ensure that we should remain positively engaged with the US during the whole process, and to ensure that we are able to tell our friends that Pakistan should not be made to choose, and Pakistan holds no ill will against any other country. So sometimes one feels that there is an understanding that in order to be close to the rest of the world, you have to compromise on your strategic alignment with China. So I consider that to be a key challenge. Key challenge number 4 is an important one. It is important because I think it has a wrong historical reality in Pakistan, which is that at least we need to keep clear of the designs of our friends or what we consider to be strategic allies, because many times the definition of strategic allies goes anywhere from China all the way down to 30 other countries. So we do not want to be a part of any other country's objectives as to what they want to do. And for that, I feel, I, for instance, can give you a good example. I remember when Secretary of State of the United States, Secretary Clinton, came to Pakistan in the Foreign Office of Pakistan and said that Pakistan must choose when the Saudi diplomat was attacked allegedly by Iranians, and Pakistan must voice its commitment to the US and against Iran. And we told them, Madam Secretary, you also have to understand, if you are truly a friend of Pakistan, Pakistan must not be made to choose between any of these countries. And they completely understood. So if you are able to voice where you stand and that you're not going to be part of anybody else's designs or interests within the region and the regional game playing, because a major challenge for Pakistan is not to be part of any game playing that is going on for other countries and other alliances' interests. Key challenge number 5 is our engagement within the region. And I understand with whatever has happened with India, it remains less of an achievable objective. With China, of course, we already have great relations. Iran, we have decent relations. But where is the great opportunity? It's in Afghanistan. And as we go further and further into the peace process, as we recognize by the world as a positive, to have a positive role in this, it's extremely important not to lose focus on the bilateral relations with everyone in Afghanistan, not just one entity or the other, but anyone and everyone in Afghanistan. That should remain a major focus, because that will determine how Pakistan is viewed within the region. Our key challenge number 6 is we must not and cannot base Pakistan's engagement in the region and shape the narrative within Pakistan on fear. I cannot emphasize this enough, because it's important. As Foreign Minister, I used to always say that Pakistan's foreign policy should never be reactive but proactive. It is you who chooses what you want to set out to achieve, and then go ahead and achieve it. You do not remain in this constant reaction to what others are doing against you, and then what you do against them. And the narrative shaping within Pakistan and outside of Pakistan against the enemies, some known, some unknown, doesn't really do much good in terms of, having a positive-oriented, engagement-oriented foreign policy goals and objectives for Pakistan as a country. So these, I thought, were the 6 main challenges. I feel what is exceptionally important in all of this is that the focus of the US is clearly changing. It is moving away. It has already moved away from this region into the Indo-Pacific, into the Pacific, into East Asia mostly. And Pakistan needs to understand that we will no more be able to look towards others to come and solve many of our problems. So it's exceptionally important that we are able to focus inwardly and to be able to engage with the world in our own terms, but not based on fear, both within and without.
So much. Just one subsequent question. What I sort of gathered from what you just said, very interestingly put, and because you sort of identified 6 challenges, the word that comes to my mind from what you've just said is perhaps the key word for our foreign policy is balance. But you concluded by saying that the focus has changed for United States especially. So can we infer from that, and would you want to just in probably 3 lines elaborate further on it, that is becoming a part of camp politics now a compulsion for Pakistan, or it's still a choice? Can we retain balance if we are not being cultivated the way we used to be?
No, absolutely. You see, since the US's interests, because interests are never permanent. Interests change with changing dynamics, right? Now, if the US interest in the region has changed, Pakistan's interests remain the same, right? And I think we are well within our means to be able to tell the rest of the world, including the US, and have a very, very open discussion with them, that we do have a natural strategic alignment with China, which is not based on the fear of the other. The US, I can argue, US's alignment with India is based on the fear of the other, the fear of China, containment of China. Pakistan's engagement with China is not based on the fear of the other, it is a natural alignment. Now, does that preclude us from being on the right side of the US? Absolutely not. In fact, Pakistan has historically played a very big role in bringing these countries together. And today the world actually requires a similar approach, that instead of taking people out and in of your camp, you widen the camp. And the world becomes a big, large camp where everybody pursues common interests. Trade, climate change, nuclear issues. So I think we can be a force of good if we are clear not to fall prey to others' designs and to stay away from them.
I'm going to now give the floor to Senator Mushahid Hussain Syed, just with one small query. You see, both India and Pakistan seem to have what we call the look east policy. Our look east is diagonally opposite to the Indian look east. And how does this play out in the evolving global order? With that, it's over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. In the name of the Almighty, the Lord of all mankind, Assalamu alaikum and good evening to all our distinguished guests. And Hina Sahaba, it's a pleasure to see you virtually. And Jahangir Sahab Api. And Brigadier Sahab, thank you for your introduction. First of all, I'd like to compliment my old friend Mohit Yusuf for taking a very good out-of-the-box initiative. Because the world today is all about a battle of ideas. Our narratives, our presentations, our perspectives, how we present that, and I think that it's about time that Pakistan has a good case, and if it's presented with facts, logic, and wisdom by people who can articulate that in different spheres within the country and outside, I think it will do the country a lot of good. And I'm very happy to see a very distinguished gathering of eminent ambassadors and other public intellectuals, and especially Huma Sahaba aap bhi jo aayi hain Karachi se. When we talk of the challenges, I think that when we are speaking at this conference, we are seeing 3 major historical transformations globally and regionally. And I think that's extremely important, which will impinge on Pakistan directly or indirectly. We see this inexorable shift in the global balance of economic and political power from the west to the east. And there's talk of this Asian century, and now various think tanks are projecting that China will catch up with the US as the world's biggest economy before the end of this decade. And the British think tank Center for Economy and Business Research had said in December that China will grow at 5.7% per annum, and America will grow at 1.9% per annum for the next 5-6 years. This was their projection. So obviously, Asia Pacific will no longer be an American lake, so there is competition and there is this concern, talk of containment. So that is a huge transformation that the US will no longer be the sole superpower in our lifetime. The second one is in our region, where Pakistan is located, and you mentioned the Qaid. His interview with Life magazine in January 1948 with an American journalist, a lady called Margaret Bork White, when he mentioned that Pakistan is the pivot of the world placed on the frontier on which the future geopolitics of the world will revolve. And that was in January 1948. And Pakistan always has had a sense of destiny. Even when Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan went to the United States on his famous visit of 3 weeks, along with Begum Rana Liaquat Ali Khan in 1950, there was a compendium of speeches which was edited and with a foreword by the top American journalist of the time, Walter Lippmann. And the title was Pakistan, the Heart of Asia. So the vision was, and we have Heart of Asia conferences today. So this was Liaquat Ali Khan Saab's visit. And you've seen the famous article of Robert Kaplan in the Atlantic in May 2009, before CPEC, before BRI, where he said that Gwadar would be the connectivity hub, shortest for Urumqi, for Kashgar, for Dushanbe, for Bukhara, for Samarkand, and all the Central Asian republics, Almaty also, so which is now turning out to be true. So in this evolution of what I call a greater South Asia as a geo-economic concept, which includes China, which includes the Central Asian republics of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, and also Iran and Afghanistan, you can see that we have already provided the land route to Central Asia via Afghanistan, and that's already functioning through the port of Gwadar. So that vision is also there. Regional connectivity, where Pakistan is the hub, and through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and through our Central Asian friends, and also linking up with Afghanistan. And as you know, that the Joint Working Group on International Cooperation of CPEC, which is the joint working group to bring in third countries into CPEC, had its first meeting in Urumqi in the first week of December. And they agreed that other countries should join in. So that is also an opening up. So that's the second major transformation in the region, trend towards regional connectivity, and we are emerging as the hub because of our location, because of our role. The third important transformation is in our neighborhood, India. They are burying Nehruvian secularism, Nehruvian ideals of inclusivity, because India is a great diverse country. And suddenly you have this Republic of Hindutva being established by the Modi regime and the RSS. And I think this was very well summed up by the great Indian writer Arundhati Roy in her article in the New York Times, the sound of silence is the loudest sound. And she said that, and I quote, in India today, RSS is the state, and an architecture of fascism is being erected in India under Mr. Modi. So I think that is a very important transformation, because if that transformation continues with India having what I call an ideological foreign policy, and that's where the problem was. Once we also had an ideological foreign policy, we wanted to have strategic depth in Afghanistan, we wanted to liberate Central Asian republics, and the US had the same thing, an ideological foreign policy under Bush Jr. With the neocons, and they wanted to reshape the Middle East and revamp everything through regime change, and that we know the consequences of that. So we are seeing that. So when in this context, when I see Pakistan in 2021, I think that Pakistan has got a geopolitical breather, what I call a strategic space for Pakistan. Thanks to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, Mr. Modi is on the defensive. His policies have boomeranged within India. And one expression of that is the letter and I think it's very important we should all study that, sent yesterday by the chairman of the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Robert Menendez, to General Austin. I was seeing the text, and he has asked General Austin, the US Secretary of Defense, who is arriving in Delhi today, that please raise the issue of human rights and democracy with India. And especially he mentions the anti-Muslim policies of the Modi government. This is the chairman of the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee writing. And he's also mentioned the farmers' protest, which by the way is largely the Sikh community. So there's a Muslim community, there's a Sikh community, and let's not forget 26th of January, Delhi was resonating with Khalistan Zindabad slogans, and occasionally Pakistan Zindabad also. So this is a very important, I think, change and Pakistan also playing a pivotal role on peace in Afghanistan. And I think after a long time, Pakistan has cordial relations with the United States and with China at the same time, after a long period. With China, of course, it's a very warm rapport, it's an intimate rapport, as you mentioned, a strategic partnership, but with the US also, it's a very cordial rapport. And it's interesting that this year is the 50th anniversary of Dr. Kissinger's visit to China through Pakistan, and day after tomorrow, I'm supposed to appear with Dr. Kissinger in person in a webinar organized by the Chinese. I'm supposed to give the Pakistan perspective. On 20th March, he will be appearing, the old man himself, on the famous journey from Islamabad to Beijing, which was in July. So the Chinese are having this conference on 20th of March by the Chinese State Council. So we played that role 50 years ago. And, but Hina Saba was also mentioning that, not at the cost of any specific relationship. And by the way, today, there's a very important meeting you mentioned about US. Today, in Alaska, the first major engagement between the Biden administration, Tony Blinken, the Foreign Secretary of State, and Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, are meeting their Chinese interlocutors, the Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and the main foreign policy czar, who is a member of the Politburo, Yang Jiechi, who was interpreter to Deng Xiaoping. So they're meeting in Alaska, so I hope that perhaps there can be some movement forward on that. So in that context, when we talk of navigating the new decade, I feel that most of the challenges that we are going to face are going to be a lot of internal challenges. I think for Pakistan it's very important, and I'm glad that on that, whether it's the political establishment or the military establishment, they are on board, that Pakistan needs to make a transition from being a national security state to a state that is oriented towards people, focusing on human security, and also on regional connectivity. And in that context, I think redefining the notion of national security is very important. National security can no longer be defined purely in terms of military might, F-16, tanks, atom bombs. I think those issues are more or less settled. It has to be more inclusive. It includes the provinces, the political parties, human rights, and also education, economy, energy, and so forth. And I think those are issues which are there. We talk of a rules-based international order, but I think in Pakistan also we have to lay the basis of a rules-based national order, which is extremely important. And I think that is one important area which is going to be focused on. Then we also are going to see a lot of the non-traditional security threats. We already have the pandemic. As Chairman Defense Committee, Moitza, a few years ago, we had already identified pandemics and climate change, cybersecurity, and sectarian terrorism as the new emerging, because these are fault lines also. And these can be threatening for countries like Pakistan. And these are not, there's no threat of an Indian conquest or Indian attack on Pakistan, but other kind of issues are certainly emerging in that context. And in this regard, I feel that we are seeing two contrasting visions for the region in which Pakistan is located. There is the vision of the Chinese, President Xi Jinping to be precise, which is more of geoeconomics, of connectivity, the Belt and Road Initiative, linking together. 117 countries have signed on that. Pakistan is one of the key players. CPEC The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is the flagship and the pivot of that Belt and Road Initiative. We have a land link with China. We have also a maritime Silk Road link through the Gwadar port. So that is one vision. And the other vision is of geopolitics, viewing the region in terms of a Cold War mentality, containment, confrontation, and I think the US, or some in the US military industrial complex have woken up to the so-called China threat. They see that suddenly China has emerged and they are very concerned about that, and they say, how do we counter that? We had the Quad the other day meeting also, they focused on China. Then the visit of the US leadership to Japan, South Korea and India. The three secretaries, the foreign minister, the defense minister and the national security advisor. So I think that Asia today cannot revert to a Cold War mindset. We have already suffered as a consequence of what happened after 9/11. And those of you who are interested, they should read the Costs of War study done by Brown University, which is the Ivy League University in Rhode Island. And that is a very key study, and that shows that the US squandered $6.4 trillion after 9/11 on all the conflicts that have taken place, not just in Pakistan or Afghanistan, but Iraq and Syria and Libya and Somalia and so forth. So I think that if we have to move forward, we have to move forward in a more inclusive approach, and with the pandemic, with climate change and other issues that underline the need for international cooperation. So Pakistan, I think a whole new world is opening up for us, but we have to, of course, focus on setting our own house in order. I think the glimmer of hope in Afghanistan is very positive also. And next 2-3 years, our role is very key in the region. But if we are able to stabilize our situation internally and take it forward, I think there's a whole new opportunity, which even the guy talked about. And
so much.
Thank you very much.
One quick subsequent question. You talk about the three transformations. And one is, of course, the fulcrum of growth moving from the west to the east and the Asian century, and whether it's going to be just the Chinese century or the India and Chinese century, all of that. But you know, there are two views to this. And one view is that the pandemic has given a tailwind to this transformation, which may lead to the crisis of global leadership, which means that confrontation will be what's going to happen. We have a new China that we are engaging with. Where does Pakistan fit in? You just talked about this seminar that you invited to, where you're going to give Pakistan's perspective. Can Pakistan emerge as not being aligned and as a bridge state, the role that it played then between China and the United States? Can can Pakistan afford to play this role between China and the United States now, and perhaps also between Tehran and Riyadh?
About the India factor, I think India under Mr. Modi is on the wrong side of history, because they are going against the whole grain of this regional economic cooperation and connectivity. Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Myanmar, Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan are all on board on the Belt and Road Initiative, except India because of its issues with China, and after last year's clash, in fact 2 clashes, one in May 2020 and the other one in January 2021, in which, by the way, the US provided strategic intelligence to India against China. So that's extremely important to understand. So I think that India, I would separate from that side, but I think that Pakistan, through its history, through different phases, has shown its policymakers, and here I would like to commend especially the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because that has been the vanguard. They've shown an ability to preserve, protect, and promote its vital interests. We were the most allied ally of the United States under Field Marshal Ayub Khan.
Also the most sanctioned.
At that time. And then we had dared to befriend the worst enemy of our so-called best friend, China, at that time. And you know how Johnson was upset with Bhutto when he went for Kennedy's funeral and said, "You're flirting with the Chinese," and so forth. But we stood our ground. Under General Zia, you remember, we were asked to destabilize Iran during the Afghan jihad period. And we refused to do that. We said, no, these are strategic interests, and we refuse to do that even now also. I think the Iran-Saudi Arabia thing is going to be, they say the civil war or a quarrel among the family is a very complicated one. And this Muslim Ummah thing, I think we shouldn't get I think that's going to play itself.
So has Pakistan moved on?
Yes, I think we have moved on, and I think countries have understood that. Look at 2-3 crises have taken place. Qatar, Saudi Arabia. We maintained good relations with Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Turkey, because Turkey saved Qatar. They sent troops, otherwise the regime would have fallen. And then with Iran and Saudi Arabia, I think both sides understand we have a good relationship with both. And this is there. And with China also, I think when it comes to our core interests, the US has that kind of understanding. They don't like it, but they know that this for Pakistan, this is a red line. Especially when our friend Mr. Trump presented the regional framework, strategic framework for a regional foreign policy on 6th of January. They unveiled that. And you know what they said? It was totally promoting India as the regional hegemon at the expense of other countries. So that is something which is not acceptable to Pakistan. So I think we are able to play that role. And don't forget, the US is also looking for friends in the region. And the US knows that the road to peace in Afghanistan lies through Islamabad, or Islamabad/Pindi.
Okay. We resolved that this morning, didn't we? Yes, we were on the same page. In fact, I think this morning the Chief of the Military Staff was more forthcoming than the Prime Minister himself on the issue. So it was a breath of fresh air, actually. To move on to Ali Jahangir Saab, and you know what?
People in khaki can be good peacemakers.
Well, I will not comment on that. Ali, you know what? I'm absolutely happy to see you here. Because for the 2 days that we've spent here, we've heard some fantastic wisdom, but it's come mostly from people who are older than me. So I was actually looking forward to having some young people on the panels. And I thought I was going to point that out to Moyed, that we should perhaps have some younger people on the panel too. Moyed is, of course, but then it's absolutely good to have you here. You know, what I'm going to talk about you is, and I looked at one of your initiatives where you said Pakistan a destination for US investment. And we are also kind of opening up. To us now, economic convergence with China does not mean that we are closing down to other countries. Where do you see Pakistan making progress there? Is that a real option? Because I'll come back to what I initiated my discussion with. We've all been talking about what Pakistan ought to do, you know, put our internal house in order, balance our relationships, so on and so forth, human security, comprehensive security, all of that. A very senior diplomat this morning said, this is not new, we've been talking about it for ages. So I wonder, what is it new that you want to do as ambassador at large for Pakistan, and as a young leader, what do you see for Pakistan's foreign policy? Where do you see Pakistan in the coming years?
Thank you, and thank you for the compliment. I am older than I look. So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'll pick up the answer to your question after speaking a little bit about perhaps a different way to look at the world order. If I were to think of the world order in its history, we start, as we all know, with Pax Romana, which was a 200-year period of, the first 200-year period of peace. And if I think about the world order today, I struggle to think if we will have that sort of peace again. And I could speak about some nations versus China. I could speak about new alliances. I could speak about nationalism in many countries, or the Western liberal order being threatened. But perhaps, since those are more obvious subjects to all of us, perhaps I can speak about something else, which is the hyper-evolution of technology and how that is completely disrupting the world order. we all are aware of the massive generation of data today and the measurement of that data and the availability and accessibility of that data. Once that data was easily available to us through the internet, technologies such as artificial intelligence, distributed ledgers, machine learning, these have proliferated. In life sciences, there are technologies that enhance your quality of life and make you live longer. But that access is not universal. Only some countries have it. The access of technology in artificial intelligence and in such subjects is also limited to some countries. And technology is also changing the nature of war. I think it was alluded to earlier by Mashahid Saab, which is that no discussion of national security policy today takes place without mentioning the threats from a pathogen, or perhaps a waterborne pathogen, or from a cyber attack. And usually those two things rank at the top of the list. So again, those are driven by technology. Today's technology is also transnational. Even though some countries have an advantage, it crosses borders to make life better or worse, or to attack or defend. And we have many, many examples of those sorts of things. Stuxnet, which was the virus that took out the Iranian centrifuges, was a transnational attack and much more effective than any foreign policy tool the US and Israel were pursuing at the time. So all of this technology leads to a massive change in how the world order is evolving. And if the evolution of world order is a function of dominance, then that dominance today is a function of technological skills and technological resources. So it's easy to see why these alliances are being formed, and I think sometimes we see technology as an effect of the alliance, i.e. because there are alliances in the West, they share technology. But I would argue that in some cases, the alliance is a function of the technology. So there are many cases where countries collaborate around powerful technologies they have, and they work to dominate the others so that the others don't have access to it. So that leaves us with the question of where we find ourselves as Pakistan. Even though our economic output is relatively small, circa $300 billion on a nominal basis, there are many countries with similar relatively small economies that have dominated in technology, whether it's the Scandinavian countries or it's Israel. These countries with similar levels of economic output have reoriented themselves from being agrarian or service-based to heavily technology dependent. And I think if we have to choose orders, which again, like it's been argued before, we must not be in a position where we are forced to do that, but we're being asked, the choice will become a choice between the Western liberal technological order, where data flows freely and access of technology companies, particularly Western ones, is easy. For example, our markets have easy access from the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, or the Chinese model, or the Chinese or Russian model, where technology barriers are created and domestic companies are championed. I'm not picking a choice. I'm not choosing one over the other. I'm just saying that the alliance questions also relate to these technological matters, because in the end, the nature of everything 10 years or 20 years forward will be almost entirely driven by these choices. Now, Pakistan has some pockets of excellence in technology, and it is up to us now to build on those. There are companies here that do world-class work. There's a huge diaspora of Pakistanis around the world that have led major global technology companies or have been in the C-suite of those companies, and we must find a way to connect them to really have a role to play in this evolving world order. Or we might find ourselves squeezed in that space as well, not just the geopolitical space or the geoeconomic space, but also the technological space. And I think in the end, it's the technological space that will drive many of the geopolitical alliances that get created. Now, onto your question about where that investment interest should come, and linking to what I've been saying, it is technology. The president of AMD, the semiconductor company in the United States in the past, has been a Pakistani. There are many others in Silicon Valley that have built very, very large enterprises and have exited those enterprises and are onto their second or third very large companies in exciting spaces. I'm not talking about consumer internet, I'm talking about machine learning and semiconductor design. And really, they've built very, very large companies. There are resources here. Many of those individuals have businesses here where they do some back office work, some design work here. Indeed, some world leaders do the same. Siemens, you may be aware, in Lahore, owns a business that does software for semiconductors. It's called Matrix, and they employ, I think, 150 people. So we have these pockets of excellence, which is what we must build on. Otherwise, in this race of alliances, we will find that there's no home for us. But there is hope because we have some excellence at Pakistan.
I don't understand a lot of this, but you know, the question that immediately comes to my mind, and it's also reflected in the questions that have come online, is that when I think about technology and digitalization in Pakistan, the first thing that surfaces or comes to my mind is the intense digital divide that exists in this country. So, as a thought leader, as a future leader, how do you see a match in this challenge? I mean, you're talking about technology as a forefront of everything that we do. Probably, if Pakistan is supposed to become what it's supposed to become, that's the front. We have to strengthen ourselves. Do we think, are we prepared for it? What are the strategies there? Are we ready? Are we doing something?
Yeah, I think the answer to this is simple. It's access. You have to just give access to technology, in particular the internet, to everyone. So if data is cheap and there's a handset available, and we somehow get a handset of a smartphone to everybody, that's simply all we need to do. And a good way to think about it is with an example. I was babysitting a 3-year-old, and maybe even younger, maybe a 2.5-year-old, who was my nephew. And the child was sitting on the floor holding a physical magazine, a car magazine, and was trying to swipe the cover, waiting for the picture to change. And when the picture would not change, this child was getting frustrated. So I remarked after that experience to some friends of mine who are in the technology domain, saying that my nephew is so intelligent, 2.5-year-old, that he was trying to interact with a magazine as if it was an iPad. And my friend said, actually, it turns out that your nephew is as dumb or intelligent as a 2.5-year-old, nothing special, so don't congratulate yourself. And the reason for that is, it's not that your nephew is smart in trying to interact this way, it's that Apple made the iPad so intuitive that even a child can interact with it very easily without any training. And I think that's how we have to think about this. If you give YouTube and the internet available to the mass population, they will learn things that we cannot imagine, mostly constructive.
Do you think it can be a replacement for the lack of infrastructure, educational infrastructure that exists?
It certainly helps with that problem. I'm not an educationist.
It's worked in Africa. It's worked wonderfully in Africa.
Correct. It certainly helps. I'm not an educationist, so I can't comment on, structured education versus this being a full solution. It certainly is better than not having something, and people with a basic education can get use out of this that is tremendous, that is beyond what we can imagine. So I think it's not just learning, it's also about employment and revenue generation. So I think all we need to do is provide access. Cheap internet, fast internet, and lots of devices to access it.
Thank you so much. Now there's this one question which it's come to us online, but I'm going to put this to all my esteemed panelists. And with that, I would also request you to give me one key word for Pakistan's foreign policy. If there was just one key word that you would want to sort of put forward as a defining word for Pakistan's foreign policy in this transitional world. The question is, in the post-COVID world, what do we have to do to place Pakistan as a change leader and shape the future world order? So essentially, what is the role of Pakistan in the post-COVID world? So to say, for China, I use a term, I said it was a, it was a survivor of COVID, and somehow it emerged as a savior for the world. I don't know how many of you agree with that. But, and Madam Hina, I would want you to go first. Give me a...
Got the Chinese jab.
Yes, we did, this morning. more vaccines have been donated to Pakistan. So, Hina, one keyword for Pakistan's foreign policy, and what should we do to become a change leader? That's a very interesting question. I like the optimism in it. Will you please unmute yourself, Hina? We can't hear you.
Yeah, okay, got it. Okay, I'm saying I'm just delighted to answer this because I think it is a loaded question and it represents all the wrongs in many ways, and I don't know who the question came from, so I'm at liberty to say this, that we hold about our perception of what Pakistan ought to do in terms of its foreign policy objectives, okay? So first of all, if you were to ask me one word, the word is proactive foreign policy versus reactive. So that one word would be proactive. Proactive means that we set out the goals for ourselves, that this is what we want to achieve for Pakistan in a 5-year horizon, 10-year horizon, 20-year horizon, and then we take that road. As opposed to a country which is reacting to what India did, what is happening in Afghanistan, what the US wants of us, what the Saudis want of us, what China requires to happen, etc. So very, very clear on that. Now, but I do want to comment on the question itself because you see, Pakistan must not seek a role in changing the world order at all. That's not what Pakistan's place in the world is, okay? So, and we love to talk about the Chinese and to learn from them, and we are absolutely their best friends, higher in the mountains, deeper in the oceans, and the strategic allies, as strategic as it gets, much as we love to call every other strategic, every other relationship we have strategic. That's the only real strategic relationship we have. Let's learn from the Chinese. For how many years and decades did they hide themselves from the rest of the world, not seeking any role whatsoever in the world? I mean, I remember as Prime Minister not so far back asking them to play a greater role in the Afghanistan dialogue or the reconciliation, and they said, Minister, please, we have much to do at home. We will come up, there will be a time when China will play a bigger role, but this may not. And we had to really rope them in because we felt they were an important regional partner. So, so exceptionally important for Pakistan not to seek a role or to seek to change the world. Pakistan should seek, through its foreign policy objectives, to change the future of its nation, of this nation. And the nation is only represented by the citizens. So we need to seek economic alliances. We need to seek not, a colloquial word is coming to my mind, which I'm not going to use. So we need to stop being on the wrong side of many, many countries and wanting to, and the countries such as India, who we cannot engage with right now because they're in this motions of nationalistic Hindutva mode where they're self-destructing and keeping and putting the entire region hostage, to bid our time with them, to just pause with them. But where the opportunities lie, such as Afghanistan, such as Iran, such as China, such as the broader region, and this economic engagement, this regional economic engagement is now real. There are real train networks, there are real gas pipelines which we can seek. So Pakistan should seek only a role for itself in the world and no role to change the world order, even the region around us.
Thank you. Senator, she said proactive and not reactive. You're going to first give me my keyword for my foreign policy.
I would say connectivity, because that's going to be deciding our future role, and that is already a role on which we are embarked because of our location. And whether it's not just CPEC, we talk of TAPI also, the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. And hopefully if Biden has his way and the other lobbies don't resist him, maybe the Iran-Pakistan, India pipeline or Iran-Pakistan pipeline can also be revived if the sanctions are lifted. So because that has now, destiny has placed us in that role, linking up not just with China, South Asia, Central Asia, Iran, Afghanistan, and that is a role which comes to us naturally. Hina mentioned about China. It was Deng Xiaoping when he launched this initiative 40 years ago. And the advice he gave, look at the Chinese wisdom. He said, and I quote, bide your time, don't flaunt your brilliance. And that was what the Chinese line was. And it's a very interesting article I saw in the New York Times. And they said that when the reform process started, and they said you will have socialism, socialist market economy. And the Western economists said that, oh, we knew that this experiment was bound to fail. And we just had to wait. And they said, 40 years later, we are still waiting. So you see, and in the meantime, 850 million people have been lifted out of poverty, and China has been transformed in this period.
Great. Ali, proactive and not reactive connectivity. So what's your key phrase for Pakistan foreign policy?
Collaborative.
Collaborative.
And I'll explain that. If we have close friends like China, and we have, from a foreign policy perspective, things to achieve elsewhere, for example, Africa, where we do have foreign policy goals to achieve with many countries. And China is putting to work in Africa enormous amounts of capital and therefore has influence to benefit from other people's strengths in some areas. So collaborative, and of course we can offer similar strengths in some other areas. So that's what I would say.
Great. We can open the floor for Q&A. I see a lot of hands. Gentlemen on the right. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. My name is Muhammad Ali. I'm Director at Center for Aerospace and Security Studies. First off, my compliments to National Security Division and Mr. Mohit Yusuf, and also to IPRI for arranging such a formidable panel on a very interesting topic. My question is aimed at Honorable Madam Hina. Because of her unique background at serving not just as a foreign minister but also as a finance minister. So you are the most qualified person to address my question regarding geoeconomics. We have been hearing for the last 2 days that Pakistan is interested in a geoeconomic based foreign policy rather than a geopolitical based foreign policy. Do you think, as a former finance minister, in the presence of 3 systemic impediments, the excessive reliance over US and Western European export markets, remittances from the Middle East, and some aid packages and bailouts from IMF and World Bank, do you have the fiscal space for an independent foreign policy which can be based on some alternative policy options? And secondly, even if you achieve and pursue such a policy, will it be compatible with your foreign policy, which is heavily dependent on China? Thank you.
Hina, over to you.
Okay, I don't like to see our foreign policy as being dependent on anyone. And I can say this with a lot of confidence after having sat in the Foreign Office, that Pakistan and China, and that's why I typically continue to say, has a truly strategic relationship, in the sense that, you see, when our 2 countries have a strategic relationship, it's when there's an alignment of interests. What they want of the region is the same as we want of the region. What they want to do within the world is the same as we want to do in the world. What we want of the world is also similar. So I do not see that we are dependent on China in any way. In fact, it's a very, it's a healthy relationship. I think we are, neither is the liability on the other, and that is something that a country must be very, very wary of ever becoming a liability on any of its strategic partners. Now, you asked an interesting question that everybody keeps on talking about, moving away from geopolitics and geoeconomics. Well, I can share with you many a times when people would say that, oh, you need to project a soft image of Pakistan. My answer is, you need to become soft to have a soft image. And I will go back to my original theme that if you want to seek geoeconomic, you must become economic. You must show through your policy decisions, through resource allocation, through your budgetary process, that Pakistan wants economic and less military and less political space, etc. So that is, when you manage that internally well, the signals will go out. Even before the signals, hopefully that change within the country will be engineered to become an economic, not force, but at least a viable state, right? And I completely concur with you and agree with you that a country which is dependent on bailout packages and on going to boards of different funds and banks, such as the World Bank and the IMF, etc., every other 6 months, literally, we do not get out of a program and we are on our way in the line to the next program, cannot even be economically independent. And it's, I think the COVID situation and what happened in 2008, the financial crisis of 2008, explained to us with abundant clarity that the lessons and the mantras and the dictates that we get in these boards are the opposite of what those board members do within their own countries when they run into problems. So this fiscal consolidation and exceptionally, hard-nosed and belt-tightening in times of difficulty, which Pakistan has been forced to do. Currently, if you look at it, much of our industry is suffering because of exorbitant, energy costs, etc. These are not the same way. This is not the same way they react when their own countries run into problems. So it is exceptionally important that somehow we can find within Pakistan the resources through better tax collection and obviously tax base to be able to have, forget an independent foreign policy, I'm talking about an independent economic policy. Currently we cannot have an independent economic policy, and I can tell you as someone who sits in parliament even now, that what we pass in June every month, every year, has very little to do with the resource allocation and the spending requirement and even the taxation questions. It is mostly what the government of the day, and any government of the day, is able to negotiate with the fund on a quarterly basis is how your economic management runs. So yes, it's exceptionally important that we can somehow find our way out of the dictates. And I'm not saying they are economic hitman or have bad designs or anything like that. I'm just saying that their recipes are ancient.
Thank you. There's this gentleman in the grey jacket. Please go ahead. And then I'd also like to go somebody at the back and take questions from the back. Yes, please go ahead.
एक स्ट्रेटेजी कंसल्टिंग कंपनी है।
अगर आप थोड़ी देर के लिए मास्क हटा लें तो समझ में आएगी आपकी बात।
जाहिर कमाल स्ट्रेटेजीज कंसल्टिंग। एक्चुअली जो पॉइंट मैं कहना चाह रहा हूँ वो उसके पहले पॉइंट ये है कि मैं उर्दू में बात करना चाहता हूँ, ठीक है? मैंने 2 दिन से ये अटेंड कर रहा हूँ और मैं देख रहा हूँ कि बहुत से लोग हमारे सबसे पहले हमें जो मैं ये एक क्वेश्चन नहीं है बल्कि मेरा एक सॉर्ट ऑफ कमेंट है कि हमें अपने आप की शनाख्त का मसला है कि हम अपने आप को शनाख्त नहीं कर पा रहे। हमेशा हम अपने आप को जियो पॉलिटिक्स में एक रेलेवेंस देखना चाहते हैं, दूसरे मुल्क क्या चाहते हैं, ठीक है ना? हम खुद नहीं जानते कि हम खुद क्या हैं। और मैंने इस 2 दिन के अंदर जो हमारी शनाख्त के जो सबसे बड़े पिलर्स हैं वो हैं अल्लामा इकबाल और कायद आज़म। लेकिन मैंने इस 2 दिन में अल्लामा इकबाल और कायद आज़म का एक भी रेफरेंस नहीं, बड़े जज्बाती नस्बत। और इसके अलावा मैं ये समझता हूँ कि रियासत मदीना के कंसेप्ट के अंडर हमारे लीडर इमरान खान बहुत अरसे से बहुत कुछ समझा रहे हैं लेकिन हम समझ नहीं पा रहे। इसलिए
बहुत शुक्रिया। इन द इंटरेस्ट ऑफ टाइम आपका पॉइंट आ गया। इट्स अ कमेंट। नहीं, it's a comment. He said he didn't have a question.
नहीं, मैं आपको पूरे इसको कंक्लूड इसलिए कि आप लोग एक मतलब मसाइल का शिकार हैं, आप अपने आप को ढूंढना चाह रहे हैं, तो मैं आपको एक राह दिखा रहा हूँ कि अपने आप को बचाइए, उर्दू में बात कीजिए, पाकिस्तान के 80% लोगों के साथ कनेक्ट कीजिए, दुनिया के साथ ना कनेक्ट करें, अपने आप से कनेक्ट करें। अपनी पहचान के लिए अल्लामा इकबाल को पढ़ें, कायद आज़म को पढ़ें, और आपकी हर तकरीर, आपकी हर सोच, आपका हर दिन इससे शुरू होना।
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। Just to remind you that in the previous session, Akbar Saab spoke about it. Senator Mushair Hussain gave a reference to both Quaid-e-Azam and Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Prime Minister gave his keynote speech in Urdu, which was later translated in English. The reason why we are conducting the proceedings of this conference in English is because we have global audience. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Ishtiyaq Ali Mekri. I belong to Islamabad Policy Research Institute. I think this panel is best qualified to answer my brief comment and question, Mr. Mushair Hussain Sayyed as well as Mr. Ali Jahangir. My question is that for the last 7 years, we have been an allied ally of the United States, and owing to domestic exigencies as well as changing regional dynamics, we have now moved towards China. So my brief question is, what is our geostrategic equation? Are we firmly now in the Chinese camp, or are we moonlighting both with the United States and China?
Thank you.
Yes, I humbly beg to disagree with the fundamental premise of your question, that we were in the American camp and now we have shifted to the Chinese camp. I think we have had a very strong, a very resilient relationship with China, which has developed strategic dimensions over the past several decades, irrespective of the closeness of our relationship with the United States, which fluctuates at different moments because of geopolitical developments. 50s, 60s, it was the Cold War, where the US needed us. 71, the opening to China. 80s, the Afghan Jihad. 21st century, the so-called war on terror. So a geopolitical event necessitated the US to embrace Pakistan. But that is not the case. That is why we call China as the all-weather friend. Irrespective of any changes within our two countries and irrespective of any changes in the region and globally, China and Pakistan stand with each other because of mutually congruent interests, which have been reinforced now. China needs us also. They are in a region where India is there, there are fault lines there, people exploiting talk of Xinjiang, Tibet's separatist leader Dalai Lama lives in India. Pakistan needs them economically and also strategically. So this is a mutually reinforcing relationship, and that is irrespective of our linkage with the United States. So it's not a black and white either or situation. Now we have a cordial rapport with the United States because the US needs Pakistan for having itself extricated from Afghanistan with some dignity or some honor. They used to say in Vietnam, peace with honor. Now they're talking on this, more or less the same lines. And they feel that Pakistan perhaps can give them a way out. And we are providing that. So it's linked with that.
Yes, I think Mushahid Saab has covered it well. I'll only add that, A, as we all know, it's not in Pakistan's interest to choose a camp. And B, I think all political parties over the years have displayed an understanding of this, where we've maintained our independent relationships with not just the US Western kind of camp or order or China, but many others also. And we've navigated that quite well. So I think this is well understood by the foreign policy planners in Pakistan.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Hello, my name is Tabish Ali, and I have completed my international relation and aspirant diplomat. So my question is to Ali Jahangiri Siddiqui. Sir, as you mentioned the importance of the technology, and it's about the access, the cheaper and faster internet and devices to access this. So in this regard, how we can tackle the hybrid warfare as the war of narratives and the leading role in the mainstream organizations like Google, Microsoft, and the content creators, they are mostly Indian-based. So they are resulting in the which produce the mindset of the general public of the Pakistan as well as the region. So how we can tackle this in this scenario if we provide the access to the everyone? And so my second part, question of a part is like, what if say Pakistan, state of Pakistan invest on the individual and make them expert and place them in the mainstream institutions like Microsoft, Google, and other mainstream institutions of the world, so they can play a role, that a tangible role in enhancing the Pakistan and promote the picture of Pakistan. Recommend. Thank you, sir.
Let me answer the second part first. From a government perspective, all we can do is educate people to provide them those resources. Then where they end up, whether they end up in global companies or start their own or do something else, that's really up to them. So I would say the government's role is to provide higher education in the context of what you're asking, so that people have employability in technology for the subset of capital we allocate to technology education. On your earlier question, I would say that, hybrid warfare I would put in within the whole realm of security technology. So it's hybrid warfare, it's cyber warfare or cyber defense, and a variety of other things. And I would say that, again, I think there are always costs of something. So if we give, I think your question is, if you give universal access and it's very cheap, will our population get influenced by the wrong people? I think that's the question you're asking. And of course, that's a risk or a cost. But the benefit of being able to have technology in today's world, where technology is evolving so rapidly, is massive, much higher than the cost. And in fact, if we fail to give people that democratized access, we are denying them something quite fundamental, which is an opportunity to advance. So yes, I won't go into addressing hybrid warfare because that's a very long discussion and really not the topic today. But I would say that the costs are tiny compared to the benefits of democratized access.
My question to Mishad Hassan Sayyid Saab, that you have talked about rule-based national order to make you relevant in international political order. What is in your mind that how can we establish rule-based national order? And as we see that currently our civilian leadership is becoming irrelevant in our today's Pakistan. People considering that civilian leadership is incompetent to run the country, and people are all thinking that only institutional leadership, that is the military, is only giving the hope to all the nation. So how can a rule-based national order in this internal power structure can be established?
Thank you. Before we jump to any conclusions, let us not forget the origins of the creation of Pakistan, which was through a democratic political process led by a great politician. Quaid-e-Azam was neither a cleric, nor a bureaucrat, nor a general, nor a feudal. He was a constitutionalist, a lawyer who led a political party which had a massive popular support, and Pakistan is an outcome of the Muslim people's struggle for the right of self-determination through a democratic process. So that is the origin of Pakistan. जो हमारा शजरा नसब है ना, वो उसमें है. And today I see a disconnect within the state of Pakistan. The state apparatus is rather antiquated, quite obsolete in terms of governance. It is failing to deliver. On the other hand, the society of Pakistan, young, vibrant, dynamic, robust, driven, self-starter, citizen activism, youth, women. So there is a revolution of rising expectations. And in that, whether it by rules-based, there have to be certain rules of dissent, of vocal expression. So I feel that in Pakistan today, I would still say Pakistan is probably the freest Muslim democracy, if you see that. You have so many multiple channels. I was editor of a newspaper, The Muslim, in the days of General Zia, when there was censorship. And I would say that we were still able to express ourselves despite that censorship, because this culture of dissent, culture of resistance, which has been there in Pakistan's people, Pakistan's professionals, Pakistan's civil society. So I think it's important that when we are now embarking that kind of ownership of the state to be more inclusive of all segments of society. And I used to say when I was editor of the Muslim that there is the officially certified truth, sarkari sach, and then there's the other facts. So I think we have to go beyond that. And the 21st century is now, nobody can really control what is happening. So that is what we need. The disconnect between the state apparatus, the governance which is still colonial oriented, and the society which has moved forward because there is so much awareness among our people. In fact, the people are ahead of their leaders. So, and this is a phase we are going through, so I think It has to be inclusive. Institutions have their role, and also the political forces have their role, and they have to go together.
I think this dialogue is a very democratic initiative. We're taking policy making to the public domain.
Yes.
So I think that's how at least I see it. Tayyiba, you had a question?
Hello. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Tayyaba Nisar Khan. I'm currently working at PTV World as news anchor. So I'm really happy that Mr. Jahangir is present over here, because earlier I was actually wondering about AI in this session, and I'm really happy that it was represented in the session. So you basically talked about how AI is transnational, right? And India is, of course, having intelligence and reconnaissance sharing with so many countries, including United States as well. Now, looking at the geopolitical situation that's growing, the Quad that Mr. Senator Mushahid Hussain just mentioned as well, and how it's called the NATO, the new NATO of the East Asian, East Pacific Ocean, Indo-Pacific Ocean rather. So how should Pakistan respond? I wouldn't say react, because Ms. Khair has rightly pointed out that it should be proactive, not reactive. How should Pakistan respond to should Pakistan perceive it, number one, as a threat, the increasing intelligence sharing between India, US regarding the Quad alliance, and how should Pakistan respond? And my second question is that there's a lot of AI investment in India in terms of war, in terms of strategic war, and in that arena. So should Pakistan be very vigilant regarding this, because nuclear deterrence might fail at certain point? We can see the killer robots and so many artificial intelligence, miniaturization, so many things which are going to definitely challenge the nuclear deterrence. So how should Pakistan ensure that it's prepared?
Thank you, Tayyaba. Jahangir, over to you.
So I would say that when we speak of intelligence sharing, I'm not a defense analyst, but within that realm, there are many different subsets. And one of those subsets in the India context is India's agreement with the United States for satellite data intelligence. And that certainly is a threat. We have a series of issues, in particular Kashmir, between us, and if one party is receiving lots of advanced technology and data, then that is certainly an issue for us. So what we should do about it is invest in that technology. I don't think a response to that is going to get us anywhere. We should try and respond diplomatically, but I think the question is, we should direct our resources towards that. The second question you asked about AI and the fact that nuclear deterrence may not be important, this is a very important point. Nuclear doctrine in many countries has not evolved to a level, in the US it has, but in many other countries it has not evolved to a level where a cyber attack will trigger that, and thankfully it has not. What that means is that you know that if there's a conventional conflict, and you know that you can have a cyber response, a cyber attack, and you know that will not trigger a nuclear response. This is a very dangerous place in the middle, because a cyber attack can be devastating. The more modern power plants we have, and they're maintained remotely, almost all modern gas turbines are maintained that way. They're on a network. And in each of these cases, the threat increases if there's asymmetry between powers. So again, the answer to that also is that we have to direct resources towards this. Almost every war now is going to be fought neither conventional nor nuclear, but somewhere in the middle.
Make a comment there?
Yes, very briefly, about intelligence sharing. There was this Quad meeting recently between the US, Australia, and Japan and India. And there's now also talk of intelligence sharing among what is termed as the echelon countries, which are 5 countries, English speaking, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and UK. And they share intelligence among the agencies through this electronic intelligence. So there's talk of sharing, bringing India also into the loop on sharing. So that would be a strategic force multiplier for India in terms of access to intelligence. And you also mentioned about the new NATO. In late November, there was an advisory council presided over by the NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg, who is from Norway. And they issued a report. And for the first time, there was a NATO report which talked of a threat from Russia and China. Now, North Atlantic Treaty Organization does not extend to Asia. And China is not a European power. So, yes, we can understand if they talk of Putin and Russia, but to involve China in that, I think that is taking it to the... So I think NATO is also trying to be relevant in the current situation, and by extending its area of operations beyond the North Atlantic. And that would be significant.
Okay, can we take one? The lady in green.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Maria Shafiq, representing Pakistan Air Force. My question is from Mr. Mushahid Hussain. Given this inevitable situation between China and US, and as we know that both of them are now being entrenched in a Thucydides trap, as we say, so what will be Pakistan's response or options for this confrontation in terms of the Indo-Pacific specifically?
First of all, I'd like to compliment the Pakistan Air Force, of course, has been a very good fighting force, and they did us proud recently during this, when India attacked Pakistan on Balakot. It was the first act of aggression after 71, and we hit back hard, and full marks to the Pakistan Air Force. The former chief is also here, so it was a befitting response. I remember after that, CNN asked me that now there will be war because Pakistan has shot down 2 planes and the pilot is captured. I said, no, Modi is a bully, and if he will now blink, because if he had blinked, then he would have tried to force us. So I think our handling of Pulwama, the way we did it, and we handled the Indian attack on Pakistan and defended ourselves so well. I would say after our handling of the nuclear tests, the way we went nuclear 98, this was our finest hour. And I think full marks to the Air Force on that. About this, I don't see an inevitability in that issue of conflict. And I would say that please read a very good article, which is contrary to the general mantra of this thing about this US-China thing. It was written by Fareed Zakaria. It came in the January-February 20th, 2020 issue of the Foreign Affairs. It's called The New China Scare. What is behind that? And I think it's very instructive. And there's another article which mentioned about this understanding which just came in this March issue of Foreign Affairs by Van Jackson, which is a New Zealand person. So please read that. It gives you the mindset of that. The only thing is that the US military-industrial complex, whose first warning was given by President Eisenhower in his last speech, who was a general, by the way, General Eisenhower. They are looking always for enemies. They need an enemy for their own legitimacy and for their own huge military and armaments industry. Soviet Union, it was destroyed. Then it was the turn of Islam, but poor Muslim countries, they are already weak and fighting each other. It was easy. And now they were looking for China. And you should know that even under the Biden administration, they're talking of $100 billion investment in nuclear tactical weapons which are ground-based, you don't need those actually. So you see that this is an unending arms race. It helps the military-industrial complex. And many of those people who are now in government, they work as consultants for them. So it reinforces that. And the China threat is easy because Chinese are not Europeans. They don't look like them. They are from a different culture. And there are other elements of race also. But I would say that it's not like the Cold War. The Soviet Union only had 40% of the US GDP. China is almost going to be equal in the next 10 years. And China is a very strong, not just militarily, but politically. And please watch the video on YouTube, the 1st of October 2019, the China National Day Parade. The new weapons they have shown, especially that famous missile, which can hit 7,500 miles, and which has 7 different warheads, which can change direction after being fired. So that, so it's a whole new world which is opening up. I think they will come to some sort of an understanding. The good thing about the US is the US has the ability for course correction. Nixon did that with China. They never accepted China. And Chinese also did that after Chairman Mao's Cultural Revolution. They also changed course. They became more pragmatic. So I would say that, and remember, Xi Jinping and Biden have had a very close rapport as vice presidents. They have been meeting regularly. So I feel that overall the US has emerged from these elections very divided and somewhat weakened also. So I don't see a very harsh interventionist foreign policy or a militaristic foreign policy. Yes, diplomatically they will try to put pressure, which is fine. Both sides do that. But this two-sided trap thing with Ellison and others, I don't think it's inevitable. Yes, we talk of Greek city-states because the stakes are very, very high. And I think within that context, Pakistan has done it in the past. It's nothing new for us. If you remember, in the 60s, we were even more difficult situation. Soviet Union was opposed to China. The US was opposed to China. We stood our ground. And then there were other pressures also. We stood our ground. So I think Pakistan has the capacity. And I would like to also briefly mention, because we're talking of Pakistan's history of foreign policy, you go to African countries, you go to other countries. In the 50s, we were supporting national liberation movements of Algeria, Tunisia. Their leaders were traveling on Pakistani passports. I met the foreign minister of Eritrea in the UN, and he said, be thankful to Pakistan. I said, for what? He said, you supported us. It was Sir Zafrullah Khan. In 52, right of self-determination of Eritrea. And there are roads named after Qaeda-e-Azam in Muhammad Ali Jinnah in Tunisia, and also in Algeria. Their leaders, Habib Bourguiba and Farhat Abbas, used to have offices in Karachi, and they used to have travel on Pakistan diplomatic passports. So Pakistan में बड़ी जान है, बड़ी हिम्मत है. We have taken positions. हमने Bosnia को support किया था, when no country was willing to support Bosnia. So it's not just about the economy; it's about your own vision and our own what role you are willing to play. So
Madam Khar's comment on that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I find this a very interesting question, and I think it is not at all inevitable. The confrontation is not inevitable at all, but 100% the confrontation has been chosen by the US as a policy objective because of the great power competition. Do not forget, I remember just before we closed down in March 2020, Munich Security Conference was the last big conference I attended. And over there, when I saw the Secretary of State of the US going on for 30 minutes, literally 25 minutes of his speech was only on anti-China rhetoric. And between that 25 minutes, I think 20 minutes was on Huawei. Now, please understand that right now, data itself is a huge battleground. So access to data, whoever is able to propagate 5G in various countries, in various regions, and the access to data that they have. And you know how the Americans have to say, well, the Chinese will be irresponsible with that data, but we're being responsible with that data, and we know that's not true. So this is really the great power competition playing. I believe the situation is very different than the Cold War, simply because China, unlike the USSR, has an ability to overpower, overwhelm, and overcome the US as an economic power also. The US is seeing this, and no great power will allow its space to be taken away quietly. I believe the Defense Strategy Paper 2018 of the US is very telling as to what their objective is, in which they say international terrorism is no more a major threat to the US. The new threat is emanating from re-emerging Russia, and more importantly, the threat that is emanating from a rising China. They have said it in the Defense Strategy Paper, the entire strategy. And unfortunately, what I see is whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, there is unfortunately bipartisan support of demonizing China. But I also see an opportunity with this new government, with this new administration in the US, because do not forget, up till the end of the Obama time almost, the US policy was try to engage with China as much as is possible, at least on the international goods such as trade, such as climate change, and to try and rope in China into the international world order. But when China, they felt, benefited from the international world order, such as becoming part of the WTO, and assisted its economy, and now became a threat to them, an economic threat, a military threat, a force which was asking for space in the South China Sea, within the Indo-Pacific region, which were supposed to be American domains. That is where I think the US seriously rethought, and of course the administration of Mr. Trump painted China as the enemy. And of course we saw that most of the European Union was first reluctant. France continues to be reluctant even today. So there is going to be, and a lot of the infighting or the threat to NATO alliances that you see is emanating from many European countries having a different view of engagement with China.
Thank you, Madam Hina. Please stay with us because we'll need you for the final photograph. Chaucer said two things. He said that there's no distinction between domestic policy and foreign policy. Foreign policy is an extension of your domestic policy, essentially. But he said another thing which is even more interesting, and that is all good things must come to an end. So the dialogue comes to an end, and so does this session. Thank you, Ali Saab. Thank you, Senator Saab. Thank you, Janjua Saab. And it was very, very interesting. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Yes.
Can I please request the guests to come and just stand in the front so that they can take a picture, sir? And if we can wear masks because of COVID, that would be great.